everybody. Thank you for coming back a little bit early. We're going to have remarks from Mayor Bibb on leadership in climate justice. So I just want to say thank you to the mayor for having me as a part of his team, because the reason I came over to the city was because of the dedication to climate justice and just transition, all the things we're talking about today, and the opportunity to act and all the fabulous planning that we've done so far as a city. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, so much. Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? Good morning. We got some good coffee in the back, so hopefully you have enough caffeine to get through today's workshop. And I want to really just applaud the work of Director O'Keefe as she's been leading our administration's efforts to really be not just a statewide model around sustainability and climate justice, but truly a national model for climate justice. And my journey in this effort was one that I did not foresee. Before I ran for mayor, I thought climate change and sustainability was just a nice thing folks in DC talked about all the time in fancy boardrooms. But when I was crisscrossing the city last year running for mayor, I saw directly what climate justice means to the residents we serve every single day. The conversations with mothers who are concerned that in Lee Harvard and Mount Pleasant, they don't have good air quality. The conversations in West Park about the fact that they wanted more parks for their children to play in that were well lit and well programmed. And the work we must do to continue to make sure that we can uplift the Cuyahoga River and Lake Erie as an example of clean, fresh water for the world. So that's the work ahead, and we have been working very hard to make sure we as an administration truly live up to those ideals around climate justice and sustainability. During the transition, we made sure that every single job description in our cabinet had a dedicated focus on climate justice. And we want to make sure that we operationalize this in every single thing that we do here at City Hall. And the nation's looking at Cleveland. Just yesterday, I had a chance to meet with Brenda Mallory, who is the president's chair of environmental quality standards. And they're looking at Cleveland as a model for their Justice 40 work to show America how Cleveland, as a legacy city, can truly create a model for climate justice to move our community forward. So I'm excited about the work ahead and know that we can certainly do everything we can to keep the promise of justice and the promise of equity alive for the next generation of Clevelanders, but that work begins today. So buckle up, and I look forward to seeing the outcome of this important workshop. Thanks so much, everybody. I appreciate it.
Okay, so some real brass tacks coming up for how do we operationalize, what are some historic opportunities around funding that at the federal government are available to us. And I'd like to bring up Courtney Kishbaugh from Greater Cleveland Partnership. And Courtney can introduce herself, but I was just inspired when she reviewed, so I think the IRA is 700 some pages long?
Yeah.
And you read all of it?
Well.
So amazing on the summary and how we can synthesize the information and what the opportunities are for a municipal government like ours. So there you go.
Thanks, Sarah. And thanks, Mayor Bibb, for his commitment. It really takes both leadership at the highest level and then leadership in all of your departments to make this work. And so I appreciate everyone being here today. So the Inflation Reduction Act, what we're going to go over today, what provisions in it are most relevant to Cleveland. It's just a sampling of the provisions. We're not going to get into all $380 billion, but we'll talk about some of the top line ones that are most important. So first off, who am I? My name's Courtney Kishbaugh. I'm Director of Innovation Projects over at Greater Cleveland Partnership. I work on a lot of miscellaneous things, but what's most relevant to you folks is that I work to translate federal opportunities into Cleveland area priorities. So how can we get other people's money to support the plans that we already have in place? Sustainability is my passion area, and it just so happens that this is the perfect nexus of building on probably 30 years maybe more of work that people have done organizing to get climate justice finally in the realm of political feasibility and to get actually some legislation behind it and some teeth to it. So it's just, this is the moment that we have to act, and this is the moment where we need to squeeze every dollar we can out of the IRA. So as I mentioned, it's a $370 billion document. It's got federal funding for clean energy, for energy efficiency, for transportation, for climate-ready ag, for clean manufacturing. If it's fully implemented, it'll get us 40% of the way to our 2030 goals. And if you add in some provisions that are in CHIPS, some that are in the bipartisan infrastructure law, we actually will get most of the way to our 50% reduction. Most programs will be run through EPA, so the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Energy, but also some will be through some of the other agencies that are listed at the bottom of this slide. The reason that this is important is for two reasons. So one, what we saw in 2020 with EDA and the amount of money that they got to do economic recovery, they had 3x the budget they've ever had before. We're seeing something similar happen with EPA and DOE. So they're getting insane, unprecedented levels of funding. They need to staff up in order to deploy that funding. And they also need to figure out program design, which they are looking to places like Cleveland to help inform. So we're still waiting on a lot of program specifics from these agencies, but while we're waiting on those program specifics, that is our moment to provide feedback based on what our city's needs actually are. So the reason I have these agencies listed is because number one, this is where we need to look to see the grant opportunities that will be coming out. But number two, if you can map the existing relationships your department already has with some of these agencies so we can leverage them in the future, it's really, really crucial. So the IRA contains a ton of different funding opportunities, but I like to bucket them into two overall sections. So the one is guaranteed incentives. These are things that go into place via tax credits. And so I think sometimes there can be a little bit of trepidation in Cleveland. Are we actually able to be competitive for some of the dollars that are coming out? And while there are competitive funding opportunities, there are so many guaranteed incentives. We need to take advantage of both. Don't discount the guaranteed dollars. If you meet the project requirements, we will get that money. And then there's competitive funding opportunities. And we'll talk a little bit about what makes an application competitive later on. So for guaranteed incentives, I know some of you might be thinking, wait, these are all tax credits. The city of Cleveland is a tax-exempt entity. How can we actually benefit from this? So the IRA allows governments and other tax-exempt entities to receive direct pay instead of a tax credit. So it's basically the same as if you were going in, into Costco and getting a new washing machine and they give you a $200 rebate. That's kind of what direct pay is, but for these tax credits instead. And that's mostly how it works for a majority of the tax credits. There is one kind of odd case that I had talked to Jeff about because it has to do a lot with the built environment. But for energy efficiency incentives, instead of the city of Cleveland getting direct pay for that, that actually goes to your architect, your designer, your contractor, and they are expected and required to pass on that cost savings to you. So I'm gonna just go as fast as I can through some of these incentives because I know we've only got really 10 minutes for the presentation plus time for questions. If you have more detailed questions, come up and ask me. I'm happy to talk at any point. I am not a tax attorney or an energy efficiency lawyer, but I will do my best and I can definitely point you in the right step. So for solar tax incentives, there's an investment tax credit that can defray the cost by 50%. You're getting a 50% discount on a solar system. There's a bit of certain provisions in this. There's a guaranteed 6% rate that goes up to 30% if wage and apprenticeship requirements are met. So if you work in workforce, this is important to note. And then because of where Cleveland's located, because we're defined as a low-income community, we get a 20% bonus credit on all of our solar arrays. That's what gets us to the 50% discount. There's also a production tax credit, which for solar arrays, which isn't as relevant to most most departments, you're not going to get, the production tax credit isn't going to be worth it if you're just putting it over, say, like the public auditorium, but the production tax credit is worth it for CPP. And because we have a municipality-owned power utility, the production tax credit makes sense for them. So then there's electric vehicle tax incentives. If we have a fleet in the city of Cleveland, we should be electrifying that fleet. It is less expensive for us to do so. We can also start to build out refueling infrastructure across the city. The refueling infrastructure tax credit is only applicable to low-income areas. We need to be taking advantage of it. And then there's the energy efficiency incentives and rebates. If we have any new buildings, any retrofitting plans, they should be taking advantage of this tax deduction / direct payment. Qualifying improvements include switching to LED lighting, or to insulating and retrofitting, or a new HVAC system. There's a lot of ways that something can qualify for this tax credit. And then individual households. So this is really interesting to me because a lot of climate work, people don't necessarily think of a kitchen table issue. It absolutely is a kitchen table issue. And forgive a terrible joke, it's a kitchen oven issue, in part because while we're building out the clean energy infrastructure that decarbonizes our power grid, we need to be electrifying everything in the meantime. So that way we're reducing our reliance on methane gas infrastructure. A lot of Cleveland qualifies for this individual household benefit, and the city of Cleveland, as a trusted partner for a lot of folks, can be instrumental in getting people's homes electrified. So I think back to my first ever internship was with the city of Cleveland. It was in the Department of Aging. We would work with folks to sign them up for HEAP programs to make sure that they knew that they could access SNAP benefits. We can use existing outreach pathways to help folks update and electrify their homes. If you are a low-income household, so under 80% of area median income, you can get an upfront discount. So your new kitchen stove is completely free, up to $14,000. If you are replacing your furnace with a heat pump, again, up to $14,000, you can get that covered. If you are between 80% and 150% of area median income, you can get 50% of those costs covered. It will be cheaper for folks to replace what they have with this program. And then if you're over 150% of area median income, you can get a 30% tax deduction. And the city of Cleveland, for example, if we own housing for folks, we have subsidized housing, we can implement these programs on behalf of people and receive a direct payment again that way. So the best resource for this, whether if you're interested in electrifying your own home, actually is the Rewiring America Guide. I really recommend taking it to your block clubs, taking it to your neighbors. I have a neighbor in the audience, and seeing what you can do. I think a lot of folks underestimate the power of making one switch, especially a highly visible switch, like getting solar panels on your house or getting an electric heat pump. But once folks see it, they start to think, oh, maybe I can do this too. And this is a way that we can directly interact with folks and increase quality of life in Cleveland and increase air quality is through this individual household program. And so these are all the guaranteed incentives. Again, if you meet the requirements, these are guaranteed payments from the federal government. We'll go into the competitive opportunities. So when I go into, I selected a few of the relevant grant appropriations. As I mentioned before, a lot of the program designs are still going into effect. There are opportunities to influence the program designs. And because we don't know all of the qualifications, I just went through and added some thought starters on ways that Cleveland could take advantage of it. But we'll find out more once more details are released. So some competitive opportunities, there's $2.25 billion for ports, for example, for decarbonizing port infrastructure. And the city of Cleveland's port is only increasing in prominence due to supply chain issues. That's a significant opportunity for us. There's environmental and climate justice block grants. That's $3 billion. We can address community health impacts. For example, Cleveland has a 24% childhood asthma rate. Their neighborhood access and equity grants. This is supposed to reconnect communities that maybe have been divided by highways or had unsustainable transportation infrastructure. We can create resilient transit stops with that. We can mitigate the heat island effect. Again, these are all things that City of Cleveland residents can see, touch, and feel, and it will make a demonstrable impact on their daily life. There's a climate pollution reduction, both planning and implementation grants. For example, we could use it to plug orphan methane gas wells. There was one that was just plugged in Cam's Corner earlier this year. You think Cleveland is a place that doesn't have methane gas leaks? We are, I can tell you that. And sometimes I think people underestimate, we've had such an inundation of federal funding that folks underestimate exactly how much money this is. And so my favorite thing to use to demonstrate is 1 million seconds is about 11 days, 1 billion seconds is 31 years. That is the scale of the kind of funding that we are seeing for climate justice, and we need to take advantage of it here. So there's some additional grants. We can use them for clean energy projects that we wouldn't be able to capitalize otherwise. We can update our building codes to meet net zero or zero energy standards. We know that density is important in reducing emissions, but a lot of our new apartment buildings that are constructed today, their roofs aren't set up properly for solar. We can work with our developers to make sure that they can take advantage of this through new building codes, and then hopefully through informal relationships in the meantime. We know that Cleveland was named the Forest City. That was back in the 1700s when we had a much larger tree canopy. We need to work on restoring the tree canopy, and there are billions of dollars available to do that. We can remediate soil, we can reduce harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie through some soil quality and water supply grants as well, again, in the billions of dollars. So how can the City of Cleveland and its partners position themselves to actually leverage the IRA? First, I said this before, but don't underestimate the power of a guaranteed incentive. We need to go after the competitive funding opportunities, absolutely, but we need to leverage every single guaranteed dollar as well. We cannot leave that on the table. We need to involve finance, operations, legal, facilities. There are a lot of folks that need to come along the journey with us, and I think today's summit is a really important starting point. Externally, relationship development is really important. So the federal agencies that will actually be rolling out these dollars, we need to be in contact early and often with them. There's also some dollars, we didn't necessarily talk about this today, there's some dollars that are going to be passed through state agencies and that municipalities will then be eligible for. I'm a little bit, I'm kind of curious as to how the rollout will work on those dollars, mostly because I'm kind of hearkening back to 2008 and thinking about when at the time Governor Kasich turned down the $400 million for Amtrak. I hope that nothing like that happens with our state dollars, especially because the dollars that are coming in would be for home energy efficiency. I'm kind of in a waiting game on those, but just in case, I mean, you'd hope that things would flow through properly. If they do, then we're going to need to make sure we have strong relationships with Ohio EPA and ODNR, the places that these dollars will actually flow through, as well as community partners. When we're talking about outreach, like the way that we work with churches is critical. The way that we work with schools is critical. For competitive applications, how do we make the most compelling funding case? The number one thing the federal government cares about is de-risking your proposal and de-risking the fact that they are giving you money. So nobody wants to be the new Solyndra who has to go up in front of, and have their agency go up in front of the federal government in front of Congress and have to testify how they use the dollars and defend their decision. That is the number one thing that agencies care about not having to do. And so you need to take out all of the risk for them. And I will also say that unique partnership models and benefits are really crucial to actually being competitive. If our applications go in, and you can instead of having Cleveland put in Buffalo, you can put in Detroit, you can put in Milwaukee, that's not a good enough application. It needs to speak uniquely to Cleveland's context and the way that we can deliver this program in a highly competitive way. There's no shortage of communities in the United States with decarbonization challenges, with high levels of poverty, and with social vulnerabilities, and we need to make the case as to why we are the best place to put these programs in practice. So the way that you can do that is in part through unique partnership models and benefits, through having a lot of folks on board, through being a community, like Mayor Bibb said, that can provide their actions as a model for other places. For example, like what we do in Cleveland, could they export it to Youngstown? Can we be a leader in translating these kind of programs to legacy city communities? And then another piece that's important is iterating based on agency feedback. So I will use the example of our Build Back Better regional application. That was an extremely successful application to the EDA. If we had won it, we would have gotten $75 million into our community. We made it into the top 10% of applications, only the top 5% got funded. So when I talk about federal applications, it's not just going to the Olympics that you have to do, you have to make podium in order to land those dollars. And so it requires a lot of frequent communication with the federal government, iterating based on their feedback to make your application as strong as it possibly can be. And then, I mean, this also applies to things that we might have applied for before. Sometimes you'll get agencies, because you haven't built a strong relationship with them, they'll give you some feedback, but it's not serious feedback. They'll say, oh, there's nothing else you could have done better, and that isn't necessarily true. That might just be a polite answer. We need to build our relationships with the agencies. Oh, sorry, I've got 1 minute. We need to build our relationships with the agencies so that we're getting true feedback. If we don't have that strong relationship, we need to look at who actually got funded and what they did and read between the lines and strengthen our proposals. The final thing that I'll say is I was involved this past month in a federal government grant review. They explicitly said that I can share this, so I'm not giving away the secret sauce. Don't report me. If you do, I won't get in trouble. But the way that it worked was you can hit a good rating, which means you hit every single thing that the proposal asked for, and you can still get triaged and not even discussed by the funding group, because you have to not just hit good, you have to hit very good or excellent. You can be competitive and not get discussed because there are highly competitive applications. And that is the way that you have to think about these competitive opportunities, is not just how do I meet all the federal regulations, because meeting all the federal regulations will get you, it will get your proposal accepted. It might not get it discussed. And it's not worth all of our time and all of the resources and the capacity building that we have to do unless we intend to be in the highly competitive category for every single proposal that we're submitting. Overall, I just want to say I do think that Cleveland has, I think we're at a unique nexus where we have the social need and the capacity to deliver. But everything will come down to individual departments. It will come down to individual actions. I would argue we know that this is the decisive decade in climate, and the actions that we choose in this city will have a ripple effect not only on our city, but on our state, on our world. And so I'd argue that if you're in the room today, you kind of have one of the most powerful positions for making a difference in our government and to the people of Cleveland. If you are struggling to connect federal opportunities with the way that your department runs, my door is always open to talk about this. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I can translate some stuff and help you figure out directionally where to go. Thank you all for the opportunity today, and excited to work together.
So as Courtney said, she'll be here during lunchtime, the interactive discussion. So if you have questions, specific questions you'd like to ask her, please go ahead. A couple of things I wanted to highlight was the emphasis on the competitiveness of the proposal. There are so many opportunities. I know that we have Cliff Hill, who's our grants management specialist. I don't know that he's in the room at the moment in finance and has been working really hard on coordinating a lot of the communication around applications for grants. But very specifically, and I know, of course, we have our political affairs, the government affairs folks, Ryan Puente and Austin Davis in the room to connect to those governmental bodies, especially, and have those connections. I'd also offer the Office of Sustainability and Climate Justice. We have connections. We've already worked, a lot of you have already worked on a lot of projects across these different stakeholders, and we're going to hear more about existing plans and frameworks from Grant Goodrich. But a lot of the stakeholders are similar, the same. There's new leadership at a lot of these places, just like at the city. So these kind of conversations about how we're doing this all together is really important. For example, one of the EPA grants that we're looking at, not through the IRA, is thinking about infrastructure for recycling, composting, waste diversion. And we're having those conversations with the Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District. We're having those conversations with the sewer district. So we're coordinating, and I think that's what it's going to take. All right, so I'm going to bring up Grant Goodrich from the Great Lakes Energy Institute to talk about existing plans and frameworks.
Thank you, Director O'Keefe. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. My name is Grant Goodrich. I'm the Executive Director of the Great Lakes Energy Institute at Case Western Reserve University. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Case was brought into this project as the local UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network partner. So already this morning you've heard from Carolyn Fox, you've heard from Elena Crete. As part of this project, they reached out to Case as a local partner to engage in this project with them. And one of the things that we were specifically asked to do is to look at the existing plans that the city has, look at other plans around climate and sustainability within the community, compare those against the recent effort that UN SDSN did with the County of San Diego and their regional decarbonization framework, and identify strengths, gaps, and opportunities in the Cleveland plan. So that's what I'm going to talk about here for just a few minutes, and then we're going to dive into our focus areas and talk a little bit about energy. If I can just take a moment and get a show of hands, I want to start with this incredible planning process that's been going on for over 2 decades here in the city of Cleveland. Going back, the one in black and blue here, the Sustainable Cleveland Municipal Action Plan in 2013, how many of you in the room were involved in that process? 1, 2, maybe 7 or 8, that's wonderful, excellent. What about more recently, Cleveland's Climate Action Plan update in 2018? I would expect to see more hands. No, oh, okay, only about the same number of hands. So that's really useful information for us to understand that for many of you today, a lot of this information may be new, or your engagement as a community and as co-workers within the city on issues of sustainability and climate may be new. Even if you weren't involved in those efforts, how many of you are using these plans in your work today? You've read the plan, you understand its relevance to your department or office. Okay, more, that's wonderful. Okay, glad to see that there are more hands that go up in the air. One of the things that is, I mean, it's really incredible when you come into this with an outside perspective and you look at the wealth of planning that has gone on in the city over the last 20 to 25 years. And as you go through, you can go to Green City Blue Lake and see all of the links to planning that goes back to 2002 and 2008. A lot of planning has been done in this city. And if you look at these efforts, I mean, highlights are really incredible community engagement. And we've already heard that a little bit, you know, highlighting Cleveland's role as a place where we have brought our neighborhoods, we have brought our community together to talk about issues in sustainability. That certainly has been a strength of this effort. When you look at the plans that are shown up here on the left, what you see are work that the city of Cleveland specifically has done. So Cleveland is a LEED Silver certified city. Everyone here knew that, right? It's been celebrated 2021. This was announced. Great work by Anand and others within the team at that time to make that happen. We have a climate action plan which has incredible guidance for the city. If you look at the bottom left, we'll come back to the Green Link report. This is Cleveland's Clean and Equitable Energy Future. This kind of summarized a lot of the 10 years of Sustainable Cleveland 2019, was kind of encapsulated and brought together in that report. On the right, you see plans that are external to the city but have had significant city input. The county's climate action plan, RTA's plan, as well as the Cleveland Tree Plan. Cleveland has accomplished a lot. And so let's first understand that there are a lot of strengths to build on. Again, great community building and engagement. We have a climate action plan. We have emissions reporting. We have data. If you go to the Office of Sustainability and Climate Justice, we have a dashboard that's reporting on performance in several of these areas. So I'm sure some of your offices are providing data that goes into that dashboard. We have, again, Lead for Cities. We have the Circular Cleveland Roadmap, Kathy's incredible hard work for the last few years that was just published and released. This is a collaborative city. I think even more than just the work within the city itself, it's the engagement with partners within the city, whether it's industry, the universities, environmental groups. We're going to hear from Western Reserve Land Conservancy here shortly, our museums, our hospitals, but also thinking regionally. We are, there's no border. I know we joke here that I-480 is a bit of a border, but we are connected with the 5-county region. NOACA is currently going through their climate planning effort. The county has their climate planning effort. As Director O'Keefe is fond of noting, we are an international border as well. Obviously, Lake Erie is a resource that we share with the province of Ontario. So what we do here matters. It matters regionally, and it certainly matters nationally and internationally, and Cleveland has been very engaged on those fronts. As we talk about our existing plans and frameworks, and I think Director O'Keefe put this very well, in looking at the gaps and opportunities, there's a word that's really not highlighted in the 2018 plan, and we don't see it before it, and that's decarbonization. And in many ways, that's why we're in the room today, is that this is an area that needs considerably more focus as we look more deeply, as we go from the breadth of sustainability, and we focus very deeply on this issue of decarbonization. As she pointed out at the beginning, on your tables, we do have definitions. If decarbonization is a term that even though we've already talked about it a lot today, if it's not something that you're really familiar with, please make sure you take the time to dive in and understand, exactly what we're talking about and how this ties into your work. And I say that again, to acknowledge a lot of you are coming at this from very different directions. You may be talking finance and budgets and spreadsheets all day, and talking about how much carbon we're putting in the atmosphere may not be something that you talk about any day of the week, any month, but we are talking about it today here. And what we hope you take away as one of the takeaways today is that this is somewhere in your job and in your job description. Let's talk about the opportunities that are highlighted both within the existing plans and as we did a gap analysis in comparison with the San Diego Regional Decarbonization Framework. Just for context, it was about 600 pages of very detailed work, sector by sector, area by area to dive in. Long-term pathways that cover all key sectors. Again, I'd like to borrow from Elena's definition earlier about pathways. Again, detailed, step-by-step, back planning from targets about how we're going to get to a certain destination. The existing plans that we have cover a lot about where we are, what we want to do, but lacked a lot of the detail that's needed. And that ties into this second point. Again, quantitative benchmarks and science-based targets. As you'll see in your definition, in your definitions and glossary sheet, we talk about science-based targets. It's those actions that will get us to stay under 2 degrees Celsius warming and ideally within 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. So we need targets and metrics that are enabling towards those bigger, broader national goals. Geospatially explicit solutions. So again, when we can see it on a map, when we understand we're talking about trees here, we're talking about reducing emissions here, it makes it far more tangible for all of us as you think about being a city planner or a development director, having maps that say this is an area we need to focus on or a very specific location we need to focus on makes it far more tangible for our planning. Again, Courtney Kishball gave a great overview and in some spaces very detailed analysis of what the Inflation Reduction Act enables for our city. So now it's overlaying what we want to do with that opportunity set and being able to act on it as an opportunity. Finally, again, workforce development analysis. We do understand, we recognize that there will be jobs lost in certain sectors as we move away from burning fossil fuels. But there will be job gains and there are needs within workforce. Think about the electricians we need to enable the electrification opportunities across our state, across our community to make a lot of this happen. With that, I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to stay near the podium and hand this over to Libby.
So we've been talking really broadly so far on decarbonization, and as we move into the next portion of our agenda, we're really going to try to dive into some of this focus area specific as we have listed here, and as you all have kind of identified yourselves with upon coming here today. So we've gathered a handful of both internal and external experts across each of these focus areas, and we have tasked them with these 4 questions to try to answer from their perspectives, from their work, and really trying to relate how each of these areas tie back into these decarbonization goals. And so they're going to cover this. It's going to be a little bit of a rapid fire. But if you notice on everyone's table, you also have a worksheet with these same questions. And so as they give presentations and then as we get into lunch, what we want everyone to do is to also think about, because you all are also experts in your areas, and you have different perspectives and different experiences and knowledge that can tie each of our departments and each of our positions back up into this decarbonization strategy. So think about how you might answer these questions based off of what you now know about decarbonization. And like I said, that will kind of be the basis for our lunch discussion as well. And so then I'm going to hand it back to Grant, who's going to start us off with energy.
Okay, thank you, Libby. I want to come back up to the national level for just a moment. When we talk about electrification, I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page with what this national strategy looks like. The idea, again, if we are going to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, stop burning fossil fuels to create and make energy, how are we going to do that? Well, we want to use renewable forms of energy or non-emission forms of energy. Think of a nuclear power plant. All right, we want to put those electrons onto the grid and we want to consume that instead of burning fossil fuels. And so by moving to electric vehicles that we're charging from the grid, by moving to heat pumps and electric ranges and ovens, we are moving our energy consumption to electricity, which will be renewably generated rather than burning fossil fuels. All right, so when we talk about electrification, that's what we mean as a national strategy. It's predicated on the idea that we are moving to more renewable or lower emission sources of electricity to enable this overall decarbonization approach. So that's the national philosophy behind this. So when we talk about how is energy connected to decarbonization and Mayor Bibb's agenda, again, this is pulled from the past planning efforts, and so several threads are pulled out of here that are recommendations. You'll even see some of this taken right from your 2018 Climate Action Plan. Today, the vast majority of Cleveland's greenhouse gas emissions are still derived from burning fossil fuels. That's to make electricity, it's to power our vehicles, to heat and cool our homes, our offices, our buildings, to run our industry. And so energy is a very, very important sector to tackle as we look at decarbonization. It is within the city's stated goals. And again, this was in an earlier slide. We talked about different timeline and targets for reducing emissions by certain dates. So it is the city's goals to reduce emissions and to do this. We talk about the links to our community. Again, right now we are burning fossil fuels to make energy and electricity. All right, that's very closely linked to reducing overall pollution. And as we think about the health impacts across our community, asthma, heart disease, if we want to help reduce those rates, the prevalence of those diseases within our community, improve health outcomes, reducing pollution is an important step and absolutely ties to the mayor's agenda. The transition to renewable and zero emission sources of energy can also be a source of job growth and job creation. So let's keep that in mind. We're talking about thousands of jobs across the state, hundreds of thousands of jobs across the nation that we expect to see in this area as we make this transition. And then do think about there are very practical aspects. There can be savings. Right now, over the past year, we all saw how much gasoline prices increased. We're seeing natural gas prices increase for heating, and in parts of the country, they will be exorbitant. Prices out in New England and in the West Coast for natural gas this winter are going to be phenomenal, not in a good way. And so this can actually mean real savings for our residents as we electrify. You're no longer paying at the pump. You're paying when you charge your vehicle, and if that can be affordable, clean energy, it can make a real difference for our community. If your agency's not up here, I apologize. When we look at relevant departments and stakeholders within the city and external to the city, is anyone here from government affairs? I didn't. So we heard from Courtney Kishbaugh, engagement with your federal partners to get these dollars here. This involves government affairs. This involves every part and each of the city offices. And this, again, here I'm just talking about energy and electricity. We all consume it, we're all using it. And as we think about the steps to decarbonize our energy consumption as a city and affect levers across the city, affect what's going on outside of City Hall, but our partners, hospitals, the university where I work, this can be very closely related. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. This is taken right from the 2018 Climate Action Plan. There's a section that talks about, where can the city where can Cleveland really make an impact on reducing emissions? I'd like to specifically call out item number 2 here because Courtney talked very specifically about the opportunities for low-income households to electrify, decarbonize, and improve energy efficiency. This was absolutely called out as an area where Cleveland proportionately has more opportunity. We've done less work than other communities to improve energy efficiency, improve clean energy use for our low and moderate income households. And this was a very, very powerful recommendation within your 2018 Climate Action Plan and in the Green Links Plan as well. Electrification of transit. I want to jump to this last one because I think this ties into a lot of elements. It's that participation and commitment of external partners. And this is where each of you, as you engage with external partners and really as we think about an opportunity for the mayor to go to major community leaders and stakeholders and say, we are making this commitment as a city, will you help us? Will you work with us? Will you partner with us? I told Mayor Bibb before he spoke, one of the reasons that I am here today is that he told President Kaler at Case Western Reserve University that help with clean energy was one of the things that he needed. And so that was written in my mission statement already as an Energy Institute director, that the city is looking for help. And so when this opportunity to work with the city came up, it was already clear to me that it was in my mission statement. So let's not forget the power of conversation to affect change and affect what we can do. There's There's an enormous amount of work and opportunity here. Again, these are opportunities for the city to activate around. These are questions, and these are important ones that I hope discussions are started today and discussions continue. I brought up an example of this first section. Right now at the federal level, the Department of Defense and parts of the operations of the Department of Defense are exempted from the nation's climate goals. All right, are there departments or offices within the city that are going to be exempted? Are security services going to be exempted from the first round of work? The city cannot achieve its goals without involving everyone. So this is a really important question that needs discussion and should be addressed. What about financial resources? Obviously, we've talked, there's an enormous, and Courtney, thanks for spelling out the difference between 1 million seconds and 1 billion seconds. There's an enormous amount of money from the federal level that's available to support these efforts. But as we think about maintenance, deferred maintenance, operations, those day-to-day things that help drive us towards efficiently operating our facilities and ensuring that we can do this on a long-term basis, is council going to make investments with the city's budget? Do we have projects that we are ready to take up to partners, to our energy companies, Siemens or Eaton, and say, we are ready to go to the federal government and apply for IRA dollars to support this effort? Or do we need to develop new projects? And if so, what's the timeline? Can we accelerate development of those new projects? And then what are some specific levers? Where can we, quickly as a city make change? Mayor Bibb obviously says frequently, I'm sure all of you have heard it 1 million times, Cleveland can't wait. We also can't afford another, starting from fresh planning cycle, and no one wants to do that. You have excellent plans in place. We want to build from that and start to have impact right away. Training is an easy way in which we can get city employees, city staff on board with understanding what these needs and goals are and can quickly implement change. Budget, legislation, building code, and we're going to talk about buildings here momentarily, are also very powerful levers and tools to make change. And so with that, I look forward to talking to many of you at lunchtime. I'd like to hand the podium back to, I think Libby's going to introduce our next speakers. So thank you all very much, everyone.
And as Grant mentioned, we are going to, we're hoping lunch, we're trying to leave a lot of time for lunch to really have kind of the interactive conversations and hopefully the questions that you all have for all of our presenters. So up next, we're moving into land use. And this is going to be kind of tag teamed, I believe, by Marco Fields from within the city's planning department, as well as Tim Dem from the Western Reserve Land Conservancy.
So I totally put Marka on the spot and asked her yesterday to be here. So I just wanted to just thank you for coming. And Tim Dean.
Okay. So I was asked to introduce Tim and and talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing together. So Tim is actually, I met Tim when he first came to Cleveland as an intern. And he came to one of my vacant land workshops that I do with our Vital Neighborhoods group. I was really impressed by his level of enthusiasm, and later learned that he actually, in his when he came to Cleveland, he actually rode his bike here, which I think is a true commitment to decarbonization. But what we're working with him now on, he actually came back from Cornell and started working for Western Reserve Land Conservancy, and we've been working with them on their CleveLot program. CleveLot is a 2-year planning implementation process where several partners, including the City of Cleveland, are collaborating on a development tool that will help guide vacant land reuse in the City of Cleveland. The city has 18,000 plus vacant lots. That's a lot to manage. And we all constantly have to look at what is the highest and best use for that land. In our partnership with Western Reserve Land Conservancy, we're trying to work through some of those things and develop tools to be able to do that. Many of the lots that we have sit vacant for years. They become an eyesore, they become dumping grounds, and create health issues for the residents in our neighborhoods. I think that as we work through this vacant lot tool with Western Reserve Land Conservancy, we can come up with solutions for addressing that. And one of the things that we are hoping to get out of this is to create a tool that is more transparent for our residents, and that improves transparency and also accessibility to our lots. We also are hoping that our end goal is to advance environmental justice, public health, and ultimately the quality of life for all of our residents in Cleveland. No one person or institution can tackle the challenge of decarbonization. It takes a collaborative effort, and we all have to do our parts. I'm looking forward to our continued partnership with Western Reserve Land Conservancy and the outcome of the Clevelot project. Please join me in welcoming Tim.
Thanks, Marka. Either you saw my slides before, or we're doing a really good job at collaborating, because I have kind of the same exact points to make. I'm Tim Deem. I'm the Urban Revitalization Fellow at Western Reserve Land Conservancy. I started that role in March. Prior to that, as Marka mentioned, I was sort of this perennial intern returning to Cleveland since 2019. And kind of focusing on that question of what can we do with all of Cleveland's vacant land. Marcus said the city owns 18,000 parcels, but in kind of like the land mass of the city itself, there's something like 30,000 parcels. And depending on how you look on that, that's about 6 times as much land area that's in the Parks and Recreation Department. So it's got a huge potential to provide a lot of benefits to folks in Cleveland, and that's been something that I've been working on for the past few years. Last year, we applied for this US EPA grant called an Environmental Justice Collaborative Problem Solving Grant, which is kind of in the framework that Courtney talked about earlier. So I think this project, Clevelot, is a little bit of a window into the future of if we get these large federal grants from the EPA, this is maybe how some of those might look. The goal of the grant is to build collaborative partnerships to address and develop solutions to problems relating to environmental and social health. So we're obviously focusing this grant on vacant land. So we don't see vacant land just as a real estate problem or an economic development problem. It's a health problem, a public health problem, an environmental justice problem. I also mentioned that we are working really closely with our project consultant, 7th Hill Design. That's David Jerka. He's been really great in helping us structure how this works. So the vision for the grant, as Marka mentioned, is to create a collaboratively built, transparent, and accessible planning tool to accelerate vacant land reuse and advance environmental justice. It's not that vacant land reuse today is impossible. It just takes a really long time, and maybe time that we don't have. So we're hoping this tool can accelerate that process and kind of develop not vacant lots in certain areas, but across the city in kind of 2 different ways. So they can be gray development, which would be providing housing and jobs and other neighborhood amenities to create more walkable neighborhoods, maybe around transit areas. And then there's green development, which can happen in other places, which reduces maintenance burdens, increases quality of life, and makes the city more climate resilient. We have sort of few different layers of partnerships and collaboration in this project. So the Land Conservancy is kind of convening an advisory committee of the 8 partners logos you can see up there. But we also have a group that's playing a really important role of stakeholder organizations, and that's like 30 different organizations, initiatives, and individuals. And maybe, real quick, if you've been to a Clevelot meeting and you're in this room, could you just raise your hand? Because there's a lot of people here. So yeah, so that's maybe like half a dozen or so folks. We're really kind of entwined with 4 key departments in the city of Cleveland. And the stage we're at right now is in these working groups where we've taken one kind of high-level administrative member of these departments and partnered them with one of the members of our advisory committee up here. So those are folks from community development, Planning Commission, Public Works, and Office of Sustainability. So we have, again, co-chairs for these working groups that are composed of somebody from the city and somebody from one of these advisory committee organizations. And they're helping guide the decisions and the development of the work that the stakeholders are producing. Our focus area is in the southeast side of Cleveland, although vacant land is a citywide issue. For the purposes of this 2-year grant, we are focusing on the southeast side because it's one of the areas of the city that's kind of overburdened with environmental justice issues, as well as containing about 25% of the Cleveland Land Bank inventory. It's a 2-year project timeline. We're a little bit before halfway through. And we've had 4 kind of advisory committee and stakeholder meetings and 4 working group meetings. So we have about 2 more working group meetings, which are focusing on like specific problems and solutions to those problems. And those will wrap up in January or February. And then next year is still slightly unstructured, but is really going to be driven by the outcomes of those working groups. They're kind of developing prototype solutions to what they've defined as key challenges to vacant land reuse. And so those prototypes are actual things. A lot of this, what we're trying to focus on is not creating another plan like the previous speaker mentioned. There's all these plans about land reuse in Cleveland, and we're trying to build off those and kind of put them in action. And so next year will be a lot of developing those prototypes into robust things that can actually help develop the outcomes we want to see. These are 4 little windows into what the process is like. So it's a lot of people in a room with Post-it notes and stickers and markers and paper and discussions. And so one of the early stakeholder summits, we had kind of mapping user experiences. I think Kathy's in that picture. Back there. And we just had a resident focus group last week where we brought in about a dozen residents from those key neighborhoods and kind of got their thoughts on what we've been doing so far to help us guide the rest of those working group sessions. So you can see Mark in that picture there. And then in October, we held our working group summit in City Hall in the Planning Commission room, where groups kind of got together and brainstormed what they want their solutions to look like, which are those pictures at the bottom. We have a great website. It's got all of our information on it there, so feel free to visit that. And that time?
Yeah, if you want to wrap up, I just wanted to comment on why I brought you here.
Yeah, well, I'm done.
So one of the reasons why I asked Tim and Marka to talk about Clean Light is, as you heard from Elena's presentation, right, when we're thinking about the national and we go to the regional and look at these solutions, and think about land use. How do we use it? 30,000 parcels, you said, of vacant lots, 18,000 owned by the city. That's a lot of land, right? 6 times the amount of our Parks and Rec land. So thinking about how we use that land is really important. If you remember the map from Elena's presentation, and thinking about that equity overlay of the area in San Diego County, right? And looking at that and thinking about where to locate resources so that they're equitable. This is the kind of work that can be done through this collaborative tool of thinking about vacant land reuse. So I also wanted to highlight that we already have working groups. This work on decarbonization is not us making a whole new working group. We don't want to do that. We don't want to have more working groups. What we want to do is to embed and incorporate decarbonization as a theme throughout these working groups that you're already involved in. We'll hear a couple more examples of what's already happening. So I would encourage you, if you don't have any questions, please, if you have questions about this project in particular, please go ahead and ask them right now. We have a couple minutes before we have our next subject matter expert come up, but I just wanted to make that connection.
Yeah, happy to take any questions.
And if you don't have questions, we also, Tim will be here during lunch. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Tim, I love the presentation. How are you thinking about carbon, like nature-based solutions for carbon sequestration in talking about land use with the community?
Well, that is in Clevelot. So Clevelot's really focused on kind of like an upstream problem, which is like it's really hard to know which lots are available for what uses and the process for actually like getting site control. So that's kind of one of the key focuses of Clevelot. If I put my other hat on for Western Reserve Land Conservancy, we have like our Reforest Our City program where we're working on planting trees, and a groundwork program where we work really closely with the Department of Public Works and Planning and the Land Bank to develop more sustainable uses for city-owned and maintained vacant lots.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How were the neighborhoods decided that you were going to focus on? Because if I look at the EJ map that the EPA has, all of Cleveland is highlighted as far as being an area that is I forget the word, disadvantaged. Disadvantaged.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you decide on those?
So the Land Conservancy, and I guess precursor to that, I wasn't involved in like writing the grant, but so the exact answer might not be my answer, but the Land Conservancy has worked historically in these neighborhoods because we used to be funded through the St. Luke's Foundation, which was headquartered there. So we've done a lot of work in these neighborhoods and have a lot of relationships with community partners there. So I think that might have served as the foundation for why we continue to focus that effort in this area.
I will also comment, and maybe other people in the room have more information on this, that if you also look at the health outcomes of different neighborhoods, the southeast and eastern side have a lot more negative health outcomes generally. If I'm saying that incorrectly, public health director can correct me. But that is, there are a lot of other challenges also on the eastern side of the city that is making it a focus area to a greater degree. And I don't know if that went to the planning there, but I'm just saying it's interesting that it's overlapping. Go ahead, Alina, and did you have an hand up too?
While I see the limited number there of targeted neighborhoods, has there been a consideration to partner with the wards and Parks Direct to kind of mend the vacant lots that are being cut as part of the grass cutting program of the city, and instead plant grass and or wild flowers?
Yeah, that is, again, kind of a downstream, I want to say that's not like one of the key problem statements that the working groups is focused on right now. It is something that I think people are aware of as an issue, but right now we're kind of focused on other topics relating to vacant land.
And are we doing the clover planting? Do you mind saying a couple words, Colin, about that?
Yes, so in Public Works, we have a pilot program where we took 5 lots on the east side, 5 lots on the west side that were vacant, and we reseeded them with clover seeds. See what the effect is. We believe we're going to be successful because clover is an invasive